My daughter gave my lake house to her husband's parents like I was already dead. She smiled in front of the whole family and said, "Dad won't use it anymore. He's too old to be driving out there every weekend." What she did not know was that 3 weeks earlier, I had quietly changed the deed, and the person she handed my house to was about to expose the lie that destroyed our family. My name is Russell Grant. I am 59 years old and I live in Madison, Wisconsin. I own a small marine repair and boat storage business near Lake Mendota. It is not a fancy business, but it is honest. I fix engines, winterize boats, store pontoons, and help people get back on the water before summer disappears. I built that place with my own hands, one customer at a time. I was never the kind of man who chased attention. I liked quiet mornings, paid bills, clean tools, and promises kept. My late wife, Linda, used to say I had the patience of an old dock post. I took that as a compliment. Linda and I bought the lake house near Merrimack after almost 30 years of marriage. It was not huge. 2 bedrooms, old pine floors, a screened porch, and a narrow path down to the water. But to us, it felt like a reward for surviving life together. We did not buy it to show off. We bought it because Linda loved the lake. Every spring she planted flowers by the steps. Every summer she kept a pitcher of lemonade in the fridge and a stack of old towels by the back door. Every fall, she sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, watching the water turn gray under the cold sky. That house held the best parts of my family. It was where I taught my daughter, Megan, how to cast a fishing line without hooking her own sleeve. It was where she learned to ride a bike on the gravel driveway. It was where Linda baked cinnamon rolls on rainy Sundays while Megan sat at the kitchen table doing homework. After Linda passed, the house became quieter, but I kept going there. Not every weekend, but often enough. I would fix a loose board, clean the gutters, drink coffee on the porch, and feel like Linda was still close enough to hear me. Megan never seemed to understand that. My daughter was 34 now, married to Derek Whitaker, a polished man who always sounded like he had rehearsed his opinions before speaking. Derek worked in sales, or consulting, or something that changed names whenever I asked too many questions. He dressed well, smiled carefully, and never missed a chance to mention how successful his parents used to be. His parents, Carl and Elaine Whitaker, lived in Milwaukee. Carl was loud, proud, and always looking for the most expensive chair in the room. Elaine was softer, but she had a way of making guilt sound polite. At first, they were friendly enough. Then slowly I noticed the way they talked about my lake house, not as my home, not as my memory, as an asset. One Saturday afternoon, Megan came by my shop with Derek. I was replacing a cracked lower unit on a fishing boat when she walked into the service bay wearing sunglasses too expensive for a place that smelled like oil and lake water. "Dad," she said, "you still going up to Merrimack this weekend?" "Planning to," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. Derek looked around the shop like he was inspecting it for resale value. "That drive has to be getting old." I looked at him. "It is 45 minutes. Megan sighed. "You know what I mean. It is a lot to maintain by yourself." "I maintain boats for a living," I said. "A small lake house is not exactly scaring me." She gave Derek a quick glance. It was small, but I saw it. I had spent years reading customers who were trying to hide bad news about engines. Family was not that different. "We just think," Megan said carefully, "maybe it is time to talk about what happens next." "What happens next with what?" "With the house," she said. "Mom is gone. You are alone. You barely use it." I set the rag down. "That house is not a burden to me." Derek stepped in with that smooth voice of his. "Nobody is saying it is a burden, Russell, but property sitting unused is not smart." I looked at my daughter. "Is that what this is about? Being smart?" She crossed her arms. "It is about being realistic." That word stayed with me. Realistic. People use that word when they want you to give up something they have already decided they deserve. I did not argue. I told them the house was not for sale, not for discussion, and not available for anyone's plan. Megan's face tightened, but she kissed my cheek before leaving like nothing had happened. After that, the comments became more frequent. At dinner, Megan asked if I had updated my estate documents. At Thanksgiving, Derek mentioned that lakefront property values were too high to waste. Elaine once told me, with a sad little smile, that lonely men often hold on to houses because they are afraid of change. I remember looking at her across the table and saying, or maybe they hold on because some things are worth keeping. She did not answer. Then Megan started pushing harder. She said the house should stay active in the family. She said it was selfish to let it sit empty. She said Derek's parents had always dreamed of having a lake place, and since I was hardly using mine, maybe there was a way for everyone to be happy. That was the first time I realized my daughter was not asking anymore. She was preparing me. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse her. I just started paying attention. And when Megan asked me one morning where I kept the original deed, I finally understood that my daughter had stopped seeing me as her father. She was seeing me as an obstacle. The week after Megan asked about the deed, I drove to Patrick Nolan's office in downtown Madison. Patrick had been my attorney for nearly 20 years, but he was also one of the few friends who had known Linda well. He understood that I did not make legal appointments over nothing. He listened without interrupting while I repeated every conversation I had recently had with Megan and Derek. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. Have they ever directly asked you to transfer ownership? No. Asked to be added to the deed? No. Asked about probate, taxes, or how the property would pass after your death? I nodded. More than once. Patrick folded his hands. Russell, maybe it means nothing. But people usually don't ask those questions unless they're thinking several moves ahead. That sentence stayed with me all week. I decided not to tell Megan about the meeting. Instead, I simply kept living my life. Or at least I tried to. A few days later, I loaded some groceries, fishing gear, and a toolbox into my pickup and headed toward the lake house. The weather was perfect. Early summer sunlight reflected off Lake Wisconsin, and for the first time in days, I actually felt relaxed. That feeling disappeared the moment I turned into my driveway. There were 3 unfamiliar vehicles parked outside: a moving truck, Carl's pickup, Elaine's SUV. At first, I honestly thought they had the wrong address. Then I noticed my front door standing wide open. People were carrying furniture inside. For a few seconds, I simply stared through the windshield. My own house, my own driveway, my own furniture being pushed aside to make room for someone else's belongings. I stepped out of the truck. Carl? He turned around carrying a boxed television. Oh, Russell, he said casually. You're here. Like I had arrived early for a party. What is going on? Carl set the box down. We're getting settled. I looked toward the porch. Elaine was arranging flower pots Linda had planted years ago. One of the old rocking chairs Linda loved had been moved into the yard. My stomach tightened. I walked toward the front door. Settled where? Carl smiled. Here. I looked at him for several seconds. I'm sorry. Where? Elaine walked over with a pleasant smile. Megan didn't tell you? I looked at her. Tell me what? She surprised us. My heart slowed. Surprised you how? Carl laughed. For our anniversary. He pointed toward the house. She gave us the lake place. I honestly thought I had misheard him. You mean, she what? She said you wanted us to have it. I blinked. Excuse me? Elaine nodded as though explaining something obvious. She told us you'd been talking about downsizing and that you wanted family to enjoy the property instead of letting it sit empty. I looked from one face to the other. Neither of them looked embarrassed. Neither of them looked uncertain. They genuinely believed they belonged there. Before I could answer, another vehicle pulled into the driveway. Megan and Derek. They climbed out, smiling. Megan hurried toward me. Dad! She hugged me before I even reacted. Isn't this wonderful? I slowly stepped back. What exactly is wonderful? She looked confused. Carl and Elaine finally have their lake house. My lake house. She sighed dramatically. Dad, no. I held up my hand. My lake house. Derek stepped beside her. Russell, let's stay calm. I am calm. He smiled politely. Good. I looked directly at Megan. Tell me exactly what you told them. She hesitated. I told them. She glanced at Derek. That you wanted them to have it. I stared at her. I never said that. You didn't have to. My eyebrows lifted. What does that mean? She crossed her arms. You've talked for months about getting older. I said my knees hurt after climbing ladders. You also said maintaining 2 properties is getting harder. I said mowing the grass takes longer than it used to. Exactly. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You turned ordinary conversations into permission to give away my property? Derek stepped between us. Russell, nobody is stealing anything. I looked at him. Really? We're trying to help everyone. You don't help someone by giving away something that isn't yours. Carl cleared his throat. Megan told us you agreed. I didn't. Carl's smile disappeared. She said you gave your blessing. I did not. An uncomfortable silence settled over the yard. For the first time, Carl looked uncertain. Then Derek spoke again. There must have been a misunderstanding. No, I answered quietly. There wasn't. Megan suddenly became defensive. You told me the house should stay in the family. I did. Well, Carl and Elaine are family. They're your in-laws. They're still family. They're not the owners. She shook her head. You are making this harder than it needs to be. I almost laughed. Harder? I had just arrived to find strangers moving into my property. Then Megan said something that hurt more than anything else. You hardly come here anymore. I looked at the porch where Linda's rocking chair sat in the wrong place. I come here whenever I miss your mother. She looked away. Derek quickly jumped back into the conversation. Russell, maybe emotions are getting in the way. No, I replied. They're helping me see things very clearly. Carl stepped forward. Look, son, if you've changed your mind after making a promise, we can work through that. I never made the promise. His expression hardened. If that's true, why would Megan tell us otherwise? Before I could answer, Megan spoke first. Because that's what Dad wanted. She looked directly into my eyes. You just don't want to admit it in front of everyone. I realized then that she was willing to lie without hesitation. Not because she had to, because she believed she could pressure me into accepting her version of reality. Several neighbors had started watching from nearby properties. Derek noticed them too. He lowered his voice. Russell, don't create a scene. I looked around slowly. Then I looked back at my daughter. I have no intention of creating one. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my truck keys, and calmly walked back toward my pickup. Behind me, I heard Megan call out, Where are you going? I didn't turn around. I've seen everything I needed to see today. As I drove away, they probably believed I was giving up. They had no idea I was heading straight to Patrick's office, because unlike them, I wasn't planning an argument. I was preparing the truth. I drove straight from the lake house to Patrick Nolan's office without stopping for coffee or even turning on the radio. My hands stayed steady on the steering wheel, but my mind kept replaying what I had just seen. Linda's rocking chair sitting in the yard. My daughter introducing my home as someone else's gift. Carl and Elaine carrying boxes through my front door as if they had every right to be there. By the time I parked outside Patrick's office, I wasn't angry anymore. I was focused. Patrick looked up from his desk the moment I walked in. You've got that look, he said. What look? The one you had when the marina supplier tried to sue you 15 years ago. I almost smiled. The difference is that supplier wasn't my daughter. Patrick motioned for me to sit down. I told him everything from beginning to end. I repeated every word Megan had said, every excuse Derek had made, and every reaction from Carl and Elaine. Patrick never interrupted. When I finished, he opened a folder that had been sitting on the corner of his desk. I hoped we wouldn't need this, he said. Inside were copies of documents we had signed 3 weeks earlier. The lake house had already been transferred into the Grant Family Heritage Trust. The trustee was me. The successor trustee was Patrick. The beneficiary after my lifetime was not Megan. It was my grandson, Noah. The property could not be sold, transferred, pledged as collateral, or refinanced without the trust's legal authority. Patrick slid the papers toward me. They can move furniture all day long, he said. They still don't own a single nail in that house. I let out a slow breath. I had a feeling something was coming. So did I. He folded his glasses and leaned forward. Russell, do you remember the questions Megan asked when she came with you to update your will last winter? I nodded. At the time, I thought she was just curious. Patrick shook his head. She wasn't asking about inheritance. What was she asking about? Control. He reached into another file and pulled out his handwritten meeting notes. She wanted to know how quickly real estate transfers after death, I remembered. She also asked whether property owners could add family members to deeds without much paperwork. Patrick nodded again. And she asked whether county records become public immediately after ownership changes. At the time, those questions had seemed harmless. Now they sounded like pieces of a much larger plan. I should have realized it sooner, I said quietly. Patrick looked directly at me. No. What do you mean? You trusted your daughter. He paused. That isn't a mistake. His words stayed with me. Trust was never the problem. The problem was someone deciding to take advantage of it. Patrick handed me another document. This is the certified deed recorded with the Sauk County Register of Deeds. The county stamp was clearly visible. The transfer is complete, he continued. Legally speaking, Megan cannot give away property she doesn't own. Even if she genuinely believed she would inherit it one day, that gives her no authority today. I nodded slowly. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with options. Patrick outlined them carefully. We could demand everyone leave immediately. We could ask local law enforcement to assist if they refused. We could file for an injunction if necessary. But before doing any of that, Patrick wanted to understand exactly how far Derek and Megan had gone. If they're bold enough to move people into the house, he said, I want to know whether they've done anything else. That afternoon, we began checking everything. Patrick requested updated county property records. I logged into my email accounts. We reviewed old text messages. Then Patrick asked a question I hadn't considered. Do you still have security cameras at the lake house? I installed 2 after someone stole a boat battery last year. When do they overwrite footage? About 30 days. Patrick smiled. Good. We drove to my shop, where the video recorder backed up footage through my office network. I pulled up recordings from the previous week. The first few days showed nothing unusual. Then Derek appeared. He arrived alone on a Tuesday afternoon. He walked around the property for nearly 40 minutes. He measured the porch with a tape measure. He took photographs of every room through the windows. He even recorded videos while talking into his phone. Patrick watched silently. He wasn't visiting, he finally said. He was documenting. We kept watching. 2 days later, another vehicle arrived. A woman wearing business clothes stepped out carrying a folder. She spent 20 minutes touring the outside of the property with Derek. When they left, Derek shook her hand. Who is she? I asked. Patrick rewound the footage and zoomed in on her car. There was a logo on the driver's door. A local real estate company. My stomach tightened. They were talking to a realtor? Patrick nodded. Looks that way. A few minutes later, Derek pulled a rolled-up document from his truck. He pointed toward the house while speaking with the realtor. She nodded several times. Patrick looked at me. Russell. What? If I had to guess. He paused. I think they weren't just planning to live there. He pointed at the screen. I think they were planning to borrow against your property. For the first time since all of this began, I realized this had never been about giving Carl and Elaine a peaceful retirement. The lake house wasn't the gift, it was the collateral, and someone had already started building their plan around a house they never legally owned. The morning after Patrick and I reviewed the security footage, I opened my marine repair shop as usual. I had learned something important over the years. When life became complicated, routine kept me steady. Boats still needed repairs. Customers still expected honest work. My personal problems did not give me permission to stop being dependable. Around noon, my phone buzzed. It was Noah. My 15-year-old grandson rarely called during the school week. He usually texted. Dad. I mean Grandpa, he said nervously after I answered. Can you talk? His voice immediately caught my attention. Of course. Is everything okay? Not really. There was a long silence. Can I come see you after school? Any time. He arrived just after 3 o'clock on his bicycle. I noticed him looking over his shoulder before walking into my office, almost like he was afraid someone had followed him. I closed the door behind him. You look worried. I am. I handed him a bottle of water and waited. I never liked forcing people to speak before they were ready. Finally, he looked up. Mom's going to be really mad if she finds out I told you. I stayed quiet. But I think you need to know. What happened? He lowered his voice. Mom and Dad have been fighting almost every night. That surprised me. From the outside, Megan and Derek always looked perfectly united. They fight about money, Noah continued. A lot? He nodded. I hear them through the walls. He looked embarrassed. I don't mean to listen. I know. He twisted the bottle cap in his hands. Grandpa, they owe people money. I felt my stomach tighten. What kind of money? I don't know everything. He swallowed. But Dad keeps saying they have to fix it before the bank does something. That was new information. Patrick had suspected financial pressure, but now we had a reason behind the sudden interest in the lake house. Noah continued. A few nights ago, they were yelling really loud. What did they say? My mom asked if your signature would be enough. I looked at him carefully. What exactly did she say? He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to remember. She said, he'll never sign if we ask him directly. And your father? He said, then we make it look like he already agreed. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Noah looked guilty. I know I shouldn't have listened. You didn't do anything wrong. He looked relieved, but only a little. I also heard Dad say that once his parents were living there, you wouldn't throw them out. I understood immediately. They weren't relying on ownership. They were relying on pressure. If Carl and Elaine had already unpacked, if neighbors believed the story, and if I refused to create conflict, maybe I would simply give up. It wasn't a legal strategy. It was an emotional one. Noah reached into his backpack. I found something. He handed me a folded stack of papers. I think Dad dropped them. I unfolded them carefully. The first page was a handwritten budget. Across the top, someone had written, Emergency Financial Plan. Below that were several numbers. Credit card balances, a personal loan, 2 late mortgage payments. Another page listed estimated values for different assets. One line immediately caught my eye. Lake House Equity. There was a large dollar amount written beside it. My name wasn't anywhere on the page, but the address was unmistakable. The final sheet was even worse. It was a checklist. Move parents into house. Talk to realtor. Refinance after transfer. Use proceeds to eliminate debt. I read those words twice, then a third time. There was no mention of asking me, no mention of buying the property, no mention of earning it, only taking control. Noah watched my face. I thought maybe you should have those. You absolutely did the right thing. His shoulders relaxed for the first time since arriving. I don't want Mom to get arrested. His words reminded me who he was. A 15-year-old boy caught between people he loved. I reached across the desk. I'm not trying to destroy your mother. Really? No. I meant it. I want the truth to come out. He nodded slowly. I just wish everyone would stop lying. So do I. Before he left, I asked him one more question. When your parents were talking, did they ever mention where all this debt came from? He hesitated. They invested with one of Dad's friends. In what? I don't know. But Mom kept saying they lost almost everything. After Noah rode away, I called Patrick. When I described the documents Noah had found, he didn't sound surprised. They're planning around equity they don't own, he said. That's what it looks like. Don't touch the originals any more than necessary. I'll have them photographed and preserved. That evening, Patrick came to my shop. We carefully scanned every page. He placed each document into separate evidence sleeves. Then he looked at me. Russell, we have motive. He pointed to the financial plan. We have intent. He pointed to the checklist. And now we have a witness who independently confirms the conversations. I looked at the papers spread across my desk. 3 days earlier, I thought my daughter had simply crossed a line. Now I understood something much darker. This had never been an emotional decision made in the heat of the moment. It had been planned. Every conversation about the lake house, every question about deeds, every visit, every smile, every suggestion that I was getting too old. They had all been leading to the same place. They weren't trying to convince me to give away my home. They were building a path to take it without my permission. The next morning, Patrick met me at my shop before I even unlocked the front door. He carried a legal pad, a laptop, and a thick accordion folder. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded. "I've been ready since I saw strangers carrying furniture into my house." Patrick gave me a small smile. "Good, because from this point forward, everything we do needs to be organized." That was exactly what I wanted. I wasn't interested in yelling, threatening anyone, or proving a point through emotion. If this ever ended up in front of a judge, facts would matter far more than feelings. We started by building a timeline. Patrick wrote every important event in chronological order. The first conversations about selling the lake house. Megan asking about deeds and estate documents. Derek's repeated comments about property values. The day we transferred the lake house into the Grant Family Heritage Trust. The afternoon Derek visited the property alone. The realtor's visit. The day Carl and Elaine moved in. Finally, Noah's conversation and the documents he had found. Seeing everything laid out on paper made the pattern impossible to ignore. None of it had happened by accident. Patrick looked up from his notes. "This shows planning." He tapped the timeline. "Not a misunderstanding." Our next stop was the Sauk County Register of Deeds office. Patrick requested certified copies of every public record connected to the property. The clerk printed the documents, stamped each page, and confirmed that the trust had been properly recorded weeks before Carl and Elaine ever moved furniture into the house. "There haven't been any ownership changes since," she said. Patrick thanked her. Once we returned to Madison, we organized every document into separate folders. Ownership records, trust documents, certified county filings, security camera screenshots, phone records, text messages, photographs, Noah's financial documents. Everything was dated. Everything was labeled. Everything could be verified. Later that afternoon, I logged into my phone account and searched through old text messages with Megan. I wasn't looking for arguments. I was looking for consistency. One exchange from nearly 2 months earlier immediately stood out. Megan had written, "Dad, you should really think about simplifying your life." I had replied, "I'm happy the way things are." A few minutes later, she sent another message. "Would you ever let someone else enjoy the lake house if you stopped using it?" My answer had been simple. "Maybe one day after I'm gone. Not before." Patrick pointed at the screen. "Save that." I exported the conversation. Another message appeared from 3 weeks earlier. "Can you send me a picture of the property tax statement? Derek is comparing taxes on different lake homes. At the time, I hadn't thought much about it. Now it looked completely different." Patrick looked at me. "They were gathering information." "I see that now." He nodded. "The nice thing about evidence is that it doesn't change just because someone tells a different story." Before leaving my office, Patrick suggested one more stop. The real estate company whose logo we had seen on the security footage. We scheduled a meeting with the managing broker the following morning. The broker welcomed us politely. Patrick explained that we were trying to understand why one of his agents had visited my lake house. The broker checked his records. After several minutes, he looked uncomfortable. "I can't discuss private client information." Patrick slid a copy of the recorded deed across the desk. "My client owns this property." The broker studied the paperwork. His expression changed immediately. "I'm sorry." He excused himself for a few minutes before returning. "I can tell you one thing." We waited. "The property was never listed." "So why was your agent there?" I asked. "The agent believed she was preparing a market analysis for someone who expected to acquire the property." Patrick remained calm. "Who requested it?" The broker hesitated. "I can't answer that without legal process." Patrick simply nodded. "That's fair." We left without pushing further. Once we were outside, Patrick smiled. "They confirmed enough." "They did?" "They confirmed someone was already acting like they controlled your property." That afternoon, I received an unexpected voicemail. It was Carl. "Russell," he said, "I know things got awkward the other day. Maybe we should sit down and work this out. No lawyers, just family." I listened to the message twice. Then I deleted nothing. Instead, I saved the recording. Patrick did the same with every voicemail that followed. Over the next 2 days, Megan left 3 messages. The first sounded frustrated. The second sounded defensive. The third sounded nervous. Each one repeated the same claim. You told us you wanted them to have the house. She never once said I had signed anything. She never once mentioned a deed, only that I had supposedly made a verbal promise. Patrick looked at me after hearing the recordings. They're adjusting their story. What do you mean? They've realized paperwork isn't on their side. He closed the folder. So now they're hoping emotion will replace evidence. I looked at the growing stack of documents on my desk. County records, certified deeds, camera footage, financial plans, text messages, witness statements, voicemails. One thing had become perfectly clear. I didn't need to prove I was telling the truth. I only needed to let the truth speak for itself. 3 days later, Megan called. Her voice sounded unusually cheerful. Dad, we're having a neighborhood cookout at the lake house this Saturday. Carl and Elaine have already met a few people around there, and we thought it would be nice if everyone got together. I let her finish. It would mean a lot if you came, she added. I already knew exactly why she wanted me there. If I showed up smiling, the neighbors would naturally assume everything was fine. If I stayed away, Megan could continue telling people she had my blessing. Either way, she hoped her story would become the accepted version. I'll be there, I said. When I hung up, Patrick looked at me across his desk. She invited you? I nodded. She thinks public pressure will make me stay quiet. Patrick closed his briefcase. Then let's make sure the truth arrives at the same time you do. Saturday afternoon was warm and bright. The lake was full of fishing boats and families enjoying the beginning of summer. When I pulled into the driveway, there were nearly 20 people gathered around the backyard. Several neighbors stood talking near the dock. Carl was cooking hamburgers on the grill. Elaine arranged drinks on a folding table. Megan greeted guests as though she had owned the property for years. Derek spotted me first. There he is, he said loudly. Several heads turned. Megan walked over with a wide smile. I'm so glad you came. I said I would. She slipped her arm through mine before I could step away. Everyone, she announced, this is my dad, Russell. People smiled politely. One neighbor said, Beautiful place you've got here. Before I could answer, Megan laughed. It's been in the family forever. I noticed she carefully avoided saying whose family. For nearly half an hour, I said very little. I shook hands, answered polite questions, looked out over the water where Linda and I had spent so many evenings together. The entire time, Megan acted as though nothing unusual had happened. Eventually, she raised a glass. I just want to thank everyone for welcoming Carl and Elaine. People applauded. They've always dreamed of owning a place on the lake. Carl smiled proudly. And thanks to my dad's generosity. She looked directly at me. That dream finally came true. The backyard grew quiet. Every eye settled on me. This was the moment she had been building toward. She wanted me to nod, smile, accept the lie in front of witnesses. Instead, I calmly placed my glass on the table. Megan, I said quietly, that isn't true. Her smile faded. What? I never gave this house to anyone. An uncomfortable silence spread across the yard. Derek stepped forward immediately. Russell, I raised my hand. I'm not finished. I looked around at the neighbors. I'm sorry you've been placed in the middle of a family matter. Then I looked back at Megan. You told everyone I gave away my home. You did. No. You said you wanted us to enjoy it. I said no such thing. Carl put down the grilling spatula. Russell, we already talked about this. Yes, and I'm going to finish that conversation. Just then, another vehicle pulled into the driveway. Patrick stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. He walked calmly toward us. Megan looked confused. Why is your lawyer here? Patrick smiled politely. Good afternoon. He stood beside me. I'm Patrick Nolan, Mr. Grant's attorney. The atmosphere changed immediately. Patrick opened his briefcase and removed several certified documents. These, he said, are certified ownership records filed with Sauk County. He handed copies to Carl, Elaine, and Megan. The lake house has been owned by the Grant Family Heritage Trust since 3 weeks before anyone moved into this property. Megan stared at the papers. That can't be right. Patrick pointed to the county certification. It has already been recorded. Derek grabbed the documents. There has to be some mistake. There isn't. Patrick remained perfectly calm. The trust legally owns this property. Carl looked from the paperwork to me. You never told us. You never asked, he frowned. Megan said, I interrupted gently. Megan told you something that wasn't true. Carl slowly turned toward his daughter-in-law. You told us Russell wanted us here. Megan's face turned pale. I thought, no, I said. You didn't think. You assumed. Derek finally spoke. Everyone needs to calm down. Patrick reached into his briefcase again. I agree. He removed enlarged photographs from the security cameras. One showed Derek walking around the property with a measuring tape. Another showed him meeting with the realtor. Patrick laid them on the table. These photographs were taken before Carl and Elaine ever moved in. The neighbors leaned closer. One quietly whispered, He had a realtor? Patrick nodded. Yes. He was preparing for a transaction involving property he did not own. Derek's confidence disappeared. That isn't what happened. Patrick looked directly at him. Then explain it. For the first time all afternoon, Derek had no answer. Carl slowly lowered himself into a chair. He looked exhausted. He stared at Derek. You told me Russell had already agreed. Derek looked away. Carl repeated himself. You said everything had been settled. Silence. Elaine covered her mouth. You told us we'd never be taking something that wasn't ours. She looked at Megan with tears forming in her eyes. Was any of that true? Megan couldn't answer. Then a familiar voice broke the silence. No. Everyone turned. It was Noah. He had arrived on his bicycle and stopped near the driveway. He looked at his parents before speaking again. I heard both of you planning it. Megan's eyes widened. Noah, you said Grandpa would never sign the papers. The backyard became completely silent. You said once Grandma and Grandpa Whitaker moved in. He looked at Carl and Elaine. Grandpa Russell wouldn't have the heart to make them leave. Carl slowly closed his eyes. Elaine began crying quietly. They had finally realized they had not been given a gift. They had been used. No one spoke for several long seconds after Noah finished. The only sounds came from the lake behind us. A boat engine hummed in the distance, and a breeze moved through the trees. It was strange how peaceful the afternoon still looked while my family was falling apart. Carl slowly stood up. He looked at me first. Russell, I owe you an apology. I nodded but said nothing. Then he turned toward Derek. You told us this was settled. Derek rubbed the back of his neck. I thought it would be. Carl's expression hardened. No, you said Russell wanted us here. Derek opened his mouth, but no words came out. Elaine wiped tears from her face. I kept telling everyone how grateful we were. She looked at me with obvious embarrassment. I never would have moved into this house if I knew the truth. I believe you, I said. She lowered her head. Megan finally tried to speak. Dad, I was only trying to help everyone. I looked at her calmly. Help who? She hesitated. Our family. Our family? I asked. Or your financial problems? Her eyes widened. You don't know anything about that. Patrick quietly opened his briefcase one last time. I think we know enough. He placed copies of the financial plan and checklist on the picnic table. Carl picked them up. His face changed as he read each page. Refinance after transfer, he read aloud. He looked directly at Derek. What is this? Derek reached for the papers. Patrick calmly stopped him. They're copies. Carl continued reading. Use proceeds to eliminate debt. He looked at his son with complete disbelief. You planned to borrow money against a house that wasn't yours? Derek's shoulders dropped. We were desperate. Megan quickly interrupted. We lost money. We thought we could fix everything. You thought you could fix your mistakes, I said, with something that belonged to someone else. Neither of them answered. Patrick spoke in the same calm voice he had used throughout the entire ordeal. Russell has instructed me to begin formal legal action regarding the attempted fraudulent transfer and the forged property-related paperwork discovered during our investigation. The color drained from Derek's face. I never filed anything. Patrick nodded. You prepared documents and represented that you had authority over property you did not own. The appropriate authorities can decide the rest. Derek looked toward me. Russell, please. I shook my head. This isn't about revenge. Then don't do this. I didn't. He frowned. You did. No, Derek. I looked him in the eye. You did this the day you decided my signature was an obstacle instead of a requirement. Nobody argued with that. Within the next week, Carl and Elaine moved every piece of their furniture out of the lake house. They apologized again before leaving. I don't expect forgiveness, Carl said while loading the last box into his truck. I appreciate your honesty, I replied. He nodded once. I should have asked you directly. We both should have had that conversation sooner. He extended his hand. I shook it. Our disagreement had been built on a lie, not hatred. Megan and Derek's situation unfolded exactly as Patrick predicted. The civil issues surrounding the property were resolved quickly because the ownership records were clear. The evidence we had collected, including the county records, security footage, text messages, financial documents, and witness statements, left very little room for argument. Derek also faced the legal consequences of his actions involving the property documents. Those matters were handled through the proper legal process, just as they should have been. I never celebrated any of it. Watching your own daughter sit in a lawyer's office is not a victory. It is a heartbreak. A few weeks later, I received a letter from Megan. Not a text, not an email, a handwritten letter. She admitted she had convinced herself that I would eventually give her the lake house anyway. She wrote that losing money had made every problem feel urgent and every shortcut seem reasonable. She apologized for betraying my trust. She apologized for involving Noah. She apologized for treating Linda's memory like an asset instead of a legacy. When I finished reading it, I folded the letter and placed it in my desk. I did not answer immediately. Some apologies deserve to be heard. Forgiveness, however, takes longer. One quiet Sunday morning, I drove back to the lake house alone. Everything was exactly where it belonged again. Linda's rocking chair sat back on the porch. The flower beds had been cleaned. The windows were open, letting fresh air move through the house. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat on the porch overlooking the water. Before she died, Linda had written me a letter and asked Patrick to keep it with our estate papers until I was ready to read it. That morning, I finally opened it. Her handwriting looked exactly the way I remembered. One sentence brought tears to my eyes. If this house ever reminds you of me, don't let anyone turn it into something that can be measured only in dollars. Let it become a place where the people who still value family can always come home. I read those words 3 times. Then I smiled. A few days later, Patrick finalized one last update to the trust. When my time eventually comes, the lake house will pass to Noah. Not because he is perfect, not because he chose sides, but because, when the people around him chose convenience over honesty, he chose the truth. As for Megan, I haven't closed the door on having a relationship with my daughter. But trust is rebuilt one decision at a time. The lake house still stands beside the water where Linda and I dreamed of growing old together. It reminds me every time I unlock the front door that peace is not found by winning every fight. Sometimes peace comes from protecting what matters, with patience, with truth, and with the courage to stand firm without letting bitterness take over. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story reminds us of anything, it's that trust is one of the most valuable things we ever give another person. Money can be earned again. Property can be protected. But once trust is broken, rebuilding it takes far more time than losing it. I'd really like to hear your thoughts. If you were in my position, would you have forgiven your daughter after everything that happened? Or would you have walked away for good? Let me know in the comments. I read as many of them as I can, and I'm always interested in hearing different perspectives. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to leave a like. It really helps the channel reach more people who enjoy emotional family stories like this one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you here. There are many more powerful family revenge and family drama stories waiting for you, and I hope you'll join me for the next one. Until next time, remember this: the strongest foundation a family can have isn't built with money, it's built with honesty.